So I'm here with one of our wonderful housing advisors, Andrew from the Edinburgh Hub. Andrew himself has lived experience of homelessness and he's very kindly offered to speak to you about it. So Andrew, can you give us a very quick overview of how you came to be homeless initially?
Yeah. So I was married. That sadly ended. It was quite amicable, and then I moved out. I thought I was doing the right thing, so I moved into a private rented accommodation that I couldn't really afford, working a 0-hour contract and studying full time. I got evicted from there illegally for having rent arrears. So I got evicted via text message, and presented at the council as being homeless, where I was told I'd made myself homeless. They agreed to house me for 60 days, so put me in a temp in Edinburgh's West End.
It's useful to hear. I suppose lots of people will hear the phrase temp or temporary accommodation, and people might have an idea in their head of what a bed and breakfast accommodation is like, but it's possibly not quite a true depiction of what temporary accommodation really is, especially in big cities across Scotland. So just a bit of a description of what temporary accommodation is like would be brilliant.
Yeah, so the first temp that I was in was in the West End of Edinburgh, like I said. It had a curfew, so you had to be back in by 10 p.m. You weren't allowed to leave before 8 a.m., which meant working in a pub was sort of a no-goer. I ended up having to drop out of university because there was no Wi-Fi. There was just it wasn't feasible, and I started working full time on a 0-hour contract. The accommodation itself the room was fine. There was nothing wrong with that room, but there was always screaming, shouting, banging at night. The staff were not the friendliest, not the nicest. There was no support. No one provided any information at all about anything. And that was the first temp. I had to leave there because I broke curfew, because I was in a van that broke down on the Forth Road Bridge. And I was 45 minutes late back. They then packed my bags for me and they were waiting for me when I got in. So I ended up spending a night in the Meadows, went back in and went to another temp, which was worse, to keep it simple.
Thank you. I think it's really important to sort of show the reality of what temporary accommodation can be like, and that it's not like being in a bed and breakfast that you might stay in on your holidays. So thank you for sharing that with us. And finally, obviously the Kilt Walk is this weekend and you're taking part for us, which is great. But just a bit of context about why fundraising for Shelter Scotland is so important to keep the services going.
The Kilt Walk. So I'm going to walk around the temps that I'd previously stayed in the housing offices. So and the reason I'm doing it for Shelter Scotland is I wasn't aware of what Shelter Scotland did when I was homeless. I never got support from Shelter Scotland through no fault of Shelters. The work that Shelter does is crucial, and they're not funded by the government. They're not funded by anyone else. It is purely donations and kind supporters, you guys. So the reason it's so important is I became an advisor because I wanted to provide the help that I wish I'd had when I was homeless. And we can't do this without support, without fundraisers, without people parting with their hard-earned cash for a cause that's really, really important to us.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there, that we are relying on wonderful supporters. So again, a huge thank you to you, Andrew, for sharing your story with